Hello readers, I'm the Avid Reader and today we're reviewing America's an Anthology, written and edited by Mark Rosenberg, Douglas Kincaid, and Kathleen Logan in 1992. So this is an anthology of Latin American history with a lot of primary and secondary sources, and it's edited by 3 scholars, and it covers different histories of Latin America along with the Caribbean. So it jumps from one topic to another, so there are 12 chapters. They're not really chronological, so it starts out with how the Spanish and the Portuguese and all these other countries, all these other empires colonized Latin America and the Caribbean. So it was mainly Spain in Latin America, except with Portugal in Brazil. And then in the Caribbean, you had also a bunch of other countries that colonized, including France, Great Britain, and the Netherlands. So you must remember that there was actually some civilizations in Latin America prior to colonization. So you had the Aztecs and some other groups, but they were pretty much almost wiped out by these conquistadors. And what the conquerors did was turning the surviving Indians into quasi-slaves by putting them on these hacienda workspaces. So you got these big landowners granted by the Spanish government, and basically the Indians owe a certain amount of work, and they're also basically made to be in debt by the government. They're taxed more than they actually produce. So by being taxed more than they actually produce, they are in effect slaves because they're always in debt to the government. Later in this chapter, it also discusses how the different republics became independent. You get a speech by Simon Bolivar, who lays out how he believes it will turn out Latin America, and you will have at least 3 nations of Latin America, possibly more, but they actually start splitting up from each other quite quickly. So you've got a bunch of countries that speak the same language that become independent because you've got these different caudillos, strongmen, who take power there. Some of these countries were unified before, but they eventually split off. And in Haiti, you actually had a revolution. It started there in 1791, a bit after the French Revolution. The African majority, because Africans had been imported as slaves throughout Latin America and the Caribbean, the blacks in Haiti rebelled against the whites there, and they were actually kind of supported by the Jacobites from France, since you got these Republicans. And not only the whites were attacked, but also the mulattoes, because here's an interesting thing with Latin America. Often you will have mixed race people siding with the whites against blacks and Indians. So we got these different race classes and factionalism going on, and in the end, Haiti becomes an independent country and the first African majority country to be independent. The next chapter is about authoritarianism and democracy, and as said with these caudillos, Latin American countries have had these periods of republican democracy, and then you got a strong man who may have been democratically elected who takes power. There are a bunch of failed economic policies. You've got these large income inequalities. Politicians like Perón try to improve the economy democratically, but it fails. You've got a bunch of juntas, especially in the southern cone, which is parts of Brazil, Paraguay, Argentina, Uruguay, and Chile. There's a bunch of juntas there who are dominating and trying to reinvigorate the economy. The author claims that Brazil kind of succeeds, but the other don't really. And then they actually democratize in the 80s. But Argentina is still a dictatorship. To get more popular support, they decide to invade the Falkland Islands, or Maldives as they're called in Latin America, because Britain has had claim on the Falkland Islands for a long time, but it hasn't been recognized by Argentina. But Thatcher and the Brits, they win that war. So the Falkland Islands remain British, even if the Argentines don't like it. There's a chapter about these migration patterns. So, for example, in Guatemala, you had a genocide, you could say, almost a genocide, quasi-genocide of Indians by the government. So you had a bunch of migrants fleeing northward. Same thing with a bunch of migrants coming from Nicaragua, all over Central America. They travel first to Mexico and then to the United States, or stay in Mexico. And the interesting thing is, border patrols in Mexico and Guatemala are much meaner than in the United States. You've got these coyotes who are helping them along. So you can see that this illegal immigration to the United States or Mexico is premeditated. When they build the Panama Canal, they bring in a bunch of migrants from the West Indies to help with it, with trade becoming more common throughout Latin America and the United States organizing it. You've got these maquiladoras who are workers, work for American companies in Latin America, and they're quite well paid compared to the Latin American salaries, and it's dominated by women. Another chapter discusses race and class. So in Latin America, Indians have had a prevalency to be discriminated. It became a little bit better when the republics became independent compared to the empire, because during the empire you had a bunch of horrible stuff. But still, they were discriminated against. You've got these Hispanics who are trying to dominate the culture. In the Caribbean, for example, in the Dominican Republic, they are trying to forget that they have a lot of African ancestry. So in the Caribbean, there's no overt racism, but they're trying to become whiter and whiter as possible. So if you're black in the Caribbean, you're trying to get someone lighter skinned than you. So you've got these social classes based on how white you are compared to how black you are. So you can see how you've got some tacit racism there in the Caribbean compared to Latin America, where there are massacres of the Indians, sometimes such as Guatemala, or you've got land seizures of Indian land given to some property owners or to foreign companies, and the governments basically say, work for them or get off. And sometimes the Indians acquiesce, sometimes they refuse, and then they get killed and things like that. Another chapter covers the women movement and feminism, because Latin America actually has a patriarchal macho culture. So the woman is supposed to do what the man tells her. You got men who work, go out, get drunk, and then beat their wife or their children or things like that. And women, they have to deal with the home, but they also maybe have to have an outside job. So the women are actually working harder than men in Latin America. And women get their voting rights after World War II. In Argentina, for example, it was facilitated because of Perón's wife, Eva Perón. And there's an evolution of women's role in society. So women are becoming more and more elected into these parliaments and congresses, and they are pushing for these reforms. And it's going on slowly but surely. They are getting elected into politics. But you've still got this machismo culture which oppresses women. There's a chapter on Christianity and religion. It's mainly Catholic, and what's interesting with religion and theology is they've been the foremost pushers for human rights. So the priests did not approve the massacres of Indians by the conquistadors. And in Chile, for example, you got Christian churches who are criticizing what the government is doing and are providing asylum for these refugees. So yeah, Christianity supporting human rights in Latin America. Then there's also a chapter on sovereignty, because there's an elephant in the room when you talk about Latin America, and it's the United States is always involved somehow. I think you got the Monroe Doctrine declared in 1823, which basically tells Europe, get out of Latin America. And it looks like it's saying, we don't want intervention, but it's actually just saying, we don't want intervention from European powers, and we can only intervene. And we can see this with the Roosevelt Corollary. So there's a bunch of interventions in Central America, and they facilitate Panama seceding from, I believe, Colombia, and the Panama Canal is built with the help of Roosevelt. And then you've got recently the problem of drug wars and narco states and dictators being involved in it. And you've got this Noriega in Panama. He makes a coup against the democratically elected president, and he is drug funded. So the US Army is sent in to restore democracy there, but Panama democracy during that period, this is late 80s, early 90s, is very fragile. So the American troops actually create stability there. You've got President Endara, democratically elected, trying to move the country along. The penultimate chapter is about revolutions. So in Latin America, you had three main revolutions. In 1910, you had the rebellion against the dictatorship, and a civil war broke out in Mexico. There was calls for rise in arms, and then you got this revolutionary party controlling Mexico since then. Later on, you got in Cuba in 1959, the Cuban Revolution. Fidel Castro takes over power, he ousts Batista, and Cuba starts funding left-wing revolutions in Latin America. So you got this communist in the United States backyard, so they're competing between capitalism and communism, and Cuba is backed by the Soviet Union. Then you've got the Sandinista revolution in Nicaragua in 1979, and far-left guerrillas take over, and you've got a civil war between them and the right-wing Contras. And here you get to see the difference between the American perspective, who is like, get rid of these communists, while Central American countries, Latin American countries are like, can we just not intervene in each other's countries? Including some of the United States allies say this. And then the final chapter is about Latinos in the United States, because this is written in 1992, and already then something like 7% of Americans were Hispanic/Latinos. So they come from mainly 3 places. So the vast majority are from Mexico, or these Chicanos, and they vote overwhelmingly Democrat. These Chicanos have been here forever, because Texas joined the Union in 1848, but the southwest of the United States used to belong to the Spanish Empire and then Mexico. So we've always had these Chicanos, Mexicans in the United States, and until recently they were treated as second-class citizens. So with more recent presidents during the 70s and 80s, they got their Voting Rights Act, so then they became equal. But still, you've got immigration fears against the Latinos of taking their jobs. This book disputes that. We've also got Cubans coming in from Cuba, these exiles, middle class, who don't like Castro, so they are trying to isolate Cuba. The right wing, they vote for the right. And then you've got Puerto Rico, which is part of the United States but doesn't consider itself American, and they don't really like the United States. You've got the family structure in Puerto Rico, while you've got the individualist society in the United States. The book ends basically with distinguishing when you adapt part of Hispanic culture into the United States larger cultural ethos, because the United States is a melting pot, you will have the contrasting effect of the American individualist society versus the family-oriented Latin American society. So, how would I rate America as an anthology? I would give it 6 out of 10. So it brings in a lot of perspectives from different groups, but it's overwhelmingly the left. So it seems to be sympathetic to socialism in many respects. I don't like how they present it as Latin America, these landowners, they're capitalists, now they're more feudal style society. Contrasted to socialists and the revolution and all of that. This book is okay, it's a 6 out of 10. And you get to learn about Latin America, but it's a bit all over the place. I was hoping to learn a chronological order. I mean, I understand it's a textbook, but still. So, yeah, it's an okay book. So, this was the Avid Reader's Reviews of America, an anthology written by Mark Rosenberg, Douglas Kincaid, and Kathleen Logan in 1992. I hope you enjoyed this book review, and I will see you guys next time.